just I know it can be confusing. This is a center based at Yale. We're not necessarily affiliated with the Gilder Lehrman Institute. In 2020, Yale President Peter Salve appointed him as chair of the Yale and Slavery Working Group. He is currently completing, or not completing, the manuscript. The book is going to be coming out actually in February, so keep an eye on that. We're also going to be doing some things in Yale, kind of investigating its history of slavery. Blight previously taught at North Central College in Illinois, Harvard University, and Amherst College. He is the author and editor of dozens of books, including the famous Frederick Douglass Prophet of Freedom, American Oracle, the Civil War and the Civil Rights Era, Race and Reunion, the Civil War in American Memory, and annotated editions of Douglass's first two autobiographies. He has worked on Douglass much of his professional life and has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize, the Bancroft Prize, the Abraham Lincoln Prize, and the Frederick Douglass Prize, among others. He writes frequently for popular press, including The Atlantic, the New York Times, and many other journals. In 2020, David was elected to the American Philosophical Society and awarded the Gold Medal for History by the American Academy of the Arts and Letters. His lecture on the Civil War and Reconstruction is available at Yale. So if you really want to dive more into this, it's free on mine. I've actually taken it. Blight has all, what I really appreciate about David, just on a personal note, is he's always really been a teacher first, and that dedication and commitment is shown out in his just always coming to these institutes and working with teachers. And that is largely because he spent his first 7 years as a high school teacher in his hometown of Flint, Michigan. So without further ado, David Blight.
Thanks, Dave. Oh, I mean, I have a lab report. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thanks, Daisha. Thanks for organizing all of this. We're, by the way, thrilled that we missed Tom. A few of you knew Tom through all the years. A few of you are very good friends with Tom. Tom Thurston was our former education director, but we're absolutely thrilled to have Daisha in this position now. She's reinventing it. Here's the evidence. And Daniel, thanks for coming in on Saturday and setting all this up. Welcome. There's no audience I love to be with, talk with, sometimes lecture, than a group of teachers, especially if you've chosen to be somewhere on a Saturday morning, because there's a lot of other things you could do. I did spend 7 years as a high school teacher. It's still the most important teaching I think I ever did. I mean, I've had lots of privileges to teach here and, you know, other places. But I have so many vivid memories of those years, probably because I was so young and I can make up the memories now. When you're in your 20s, you have boundless energy. You don't have to sleep much, or you think. But you know, it was a time when the Flint, Michigan public school system was still very strong. The city was still very strong. That's where I grew up. But that city was beginning to turn into its future of decline, economically and in many other ways. The water crisis didn't come for, 30 years, 40 years later. But still a very strong school system. And I taught in a brand new high school, which is always a measure of a city if it's building new schools. But I taught in an interior room with no windows. It was the new design, They had these accordion walls, you could open them up. It often smelled like a locker room because they had no windows, no ventilation, no anything. But I had this deal with my principal, and then I'll leave that story behind. He was an old Marine. He didn't really care what we did inside of our classrooms, as long as we kept peace out in the hall. You keep order out in your hallway, I'll leave you alone. And so here we were, a bunch of young Turks. We said, good deal. We'll do what we want. Now, we screwed up the curriculum we really messed it up. We taught all kinds of things that probably we shouldn't have. We were inventing all kinds of new courses. We were abandoning survey with high school kids. We were crazy. On the other hand, we were creative. And one of the most creative things I ever did is that up in the corner of the classroom was, of course, the PA speaker. And I hated the PA announcers. I don't, you still have these every day.
Sometimes
I
they go on.
hated them. And they would drone on and on. The volleyball team will not meet today at 3, but at 4. And used to swear at it. And the kids. One day, the assistant principal's son came up to me, and I'm still in touch with this guy. I don't want to admit how old he is now. He emails me 3 or 4 times a year. He said, I can rig a switch on that if you want. I can give you an on and off switch on that. Kid was good with tech. So he came in after school. He rigged up a switch. I had an on and off switch. I told the student, you must swear to never tell anybody. He probably did. And so PA would come on, I just turn it off and I just keep teaching. I was, subversive resistance. That's about as far as we got. Anyway, I've always wondered, that school is now set to be torn down, like so many other things in Flint. It's closed. But I've always wondered, is that off on switch still? Ruined it because no one else probably ever knew about it. Anyway, enough of that. All right, Reconstruction. It was fascinating to hear you say when you had learned about it or not. And I don't recollect, because how can you recollect high school anymore? But I don't recollect learning anything about it in high school. And I had a great high school history teacher, at least in her own way, she was. Mildred Hodges. She was all about cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. We didn't have these diagrams of cause and effect, cause and effect. And in the long run, I understood what she was doing. She was trying to tell us something. And I still don't remember learning anything about Reconstruction until college. And even then, not much. I took a great lecture course at Michigan State, where I was an undergraduate, with old Fred Williams, who was brilliant lecturer, pretty good historian. Civil War era, I think is what it was called. He didn't do much on Reconstruction. This was the late 60s. But if you look back through the scholarship, and I know some of you have, I don't want to go into all the historiography of Reconstruction. I want to take you through what I'm going to suggest are just 5 huge themes, some of which you surely teach about, and then suggest there are, I like lists. There are 4 great challenges, not 3, not 5. You can make it into 6 if you want. But, it was in college that I began to learn about Reconstruction, but not very much. Now, the scholarship on Reconstruction was just beginning to revive in the 60s. Really just beginning to revive. It was already reviving before I was an undergraduate, but how would I know? And then in the 70s, it really began to take off. And then by the 80s, finally, by the late 80s, we got this huge synthetic work by Eric Foner. One of my models, now a dear friend. There've been other attempts at like short histories of Reconstruction. John O. Franklin wrote a short history of Reconstruction. Ken Stack wrote a short history of Reconstruction. There was this urgent revival among scholars at least, of writing, researching and writing about the great crises of Reconstruction in the 60s, a little bit in the 50s, but not much. And then into the 70s, which was very much part of the revolutions in scholarship going on in the study of slavery. And even in the study of the coming of the Civil War. I heard you say earlier, oh, they all get Civil War, they've all had Civil War, they've all had Civil War. Well, I know what you mean. As kind of Stamp once said, there's glory enough to go around with the war, but once you get to Reconstruction, that's all rather complicated. And that's one of the reasons people don't look at it much. It's messy. It's got corruption in it, as though other eras don't. It's complex as hell. It's full of, you know, terrible human motives and human triumphs. But it's not that far back that this study of Reconstruction, lest you feel like, you know, you should have known this all along, should have known this all along. I mean, your own teachers. I didn't have a teacher who really taught me much about Reconstruction until I was in graduate school. It was my mentor, Richard Sewell, who was, you know, to this day, I still thank God I had Richard Sewell as a mentor. Am I brushing this? Sorry. So now let's think first. But by the way, can I raise this? I might want to scratch. I know this is extremely old-fashioned to write things on a whiteboard, and I have all kinds of images and stuff. But yeah, get me off this. You know, that photograph's 10 years old now, just in case. Anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
No.
Is that how we? Isn't there something over here where we raise the?
How about I do this?
Right here, thing. The one button I know. Oops. I don't know. I would just shut this off, Dan. This is Daniel Vera, by the way.
Yeah, clap for Daniel.
Media technology person, among other things, at the Gilda Lehrman Center, without which we can't do anything. Daniel didn't like it when I embarrassed him about how talented he is, so I won't go too much further with it.
That's talent right there.
He also runs a lot of technology around Moose Hall here for all the other Knowledge Center institutes and so on. We hired him and then they keep trying to steal him away. But anyway, great, thanks. I'm sorry about the you know, I should have known. The first three of these I tried, they're all worn out. They're dried out because nobody uses them. Finally found one that sort of right, so I don't know, it's very old fashioned. Reconstruction is a period of American history. Forgive me for those of you who know this better than others, that there's no precedent for, obviously. The country had never had an all-out civil war, tore itself to pieces, slaughtered probably in excess of 700,000 people. A whole section of the country had seceded from the Union, testing whether a federal union meant anything at all or could hold together at all. And then somehow we put back together. There was nowhere in the Constitution where you could look up what do you do if 11 states secede from the Union, you have an all-out, that clause wasn't included. What if you have an all-out civil war? How do you put the thing back together? What are former seceded states? Are they states? Or are they, as Charles Sumner said, conquered provinces? Or as Thaddeus Stevens, these are the radical Republicans, said, they were, they had, according to Thaddeus Stevens, committed state suicide. In other words, they're not states anymore, according to the radical Republic. Others, Lincoln included, at least at first, although he didn't live long enough to play this out. Lincoln said, well, and he had good political reasons to put it this way. Lincoln's view of the seceded states was, well, they're, quote, out of their normal relationship with the Union. Huh? Okay, they sure as hell are. What does that mean? They're out of their normal relationship to the Union. Now, he had reason to put it that way because he wanted a rapid reconstruction, if possible. I come back to that in a while. He wanted to establish peace At the same time, you were going to reconstruct these states out of enormous bloodshed and horrific bitterness. And he did not know exactly how to do it. That's one of the things you learn about Reconstruction. It's experimental. It's one of the things that makes it so fascinating. They are experimenting with how to define the freed people. Who are the 4 million people who were freed from slavery? What are they? Are they immediately citizens? Well, to some degree, they are. And under the 14th Amendment, they become citizens. As long as that can be enforced. What are these states? If they're out of the Union, if they're conquered provinces, like in any other war, if the United States had gone to war, well, it did with Mexico, and conquered part of what was Mexican land, you take it, you remake it, you remold it. The experiment becomes state making. And under the Constitution, and I'm trying to set up here, I'm going to back up, I'm trying to set up here what is ultimately an enormous constitutional crisis. One of the coolest things about teaching Reconstruction, and there are many things, is that God, can your students learn a lot about the Constitution. And look what we're going through now. I've never seen, well, first of all, I've never lived through, I mean, I've lived too long, but I've never lived through a period like the last, let's just say the last 8 years or 10. Let's go back to at least the Charleston massacre of 15, or perhaps even a bit earlier. I've never lived through a period when Reconstruction is suddenly in the news, it's in the voices of pundits, it's part of public discourse and discussion. Part of that is because we're constantly everywhere now talking about our democracy. I've been to so many democracy forums in the past. Everyone's having a democracy. Have you noticed? You know, I want to put out a new bumper sticker that says honk if you're not doing a democracy forum. For good reason. We're doing democracy forums because it's in trouble. And immediately that takes us to our structures, constitutional structures, legal structures. Are they working? Are our institutions functioning? The one time in our history when our institutions, essential government institutions, fell apart, collapsed into war, and had to be reinvented is the Civil War Reconstruction. And emphasis on the latter part of that. It had to be remade. And it was remade. There is a triumph story here. Some of you were saying, oh, it's always Reconstruction, oh, it failed. I know there is that terrible sort of assumption out there. Well, in some ways, it did fail. Let's not deny that. We'll come back to that. The project of radical Reconstruction, but I much prefer, well, lots of historians do now, certainly Eric Foner does, the term defeat. Reconstruction was defeated as much as it failed. I mean, it eroded. There was a retreat from it. You know this. There's a rise and fall story here. But the fall was as much a defeat by the White South and the Southern Democratic Party of these regimes put in place early in Reconstruction, and in some cases, at least 3 states, those Republican Party regimes in the South survived all the way down to 1876. Reconstruction is defeated, and often by violence, in the war after the war. Okay. Let's first, well, actually, let me go to the 4 challenges first. This is just framework stuff. We all tirelessly use that word framework, don't we? Everything's a framework now. That's a framework for everything. Fine. But I put over here 4 great challenges. This is a big way to think about Reconstruction. If you can land on all 4 of these at some point in the way you teach about it, even if you only teach it for 3 days or 3 weeks, or as you said, I guess the primary theme of your course, God bless you. Don't forget there was a war before it though, because without the war, there's no thing. Number one, as a big question, these are really questions or challenges. Once the war is over and there's going to be something called Reconstruction, who will rule in the South? Number one, who will rule in this conquered South? And it is a vacuum. You know how physics doesn't like a vacuum. Somebody's going to rule. Is it going to be former Confederates ushered quickly back into power, which is exactly what they do in the fall of 1865 under these so-called Andrew Johnson governments, until the Republicans in Congress put up a stop sign on the door to the Capitol and say, no, we're going to take some more time with this, at least. But who's going to rule? Is it going to be ex-Confederates? Is it going to be freedmen themselves? Is it going to be Yankees who come down south, so-called carpetbaggers? Is it going to be the federal government stepping in and reorganizing everything about the South, which is so un-American, which is why this is so revolutionary? And a lot of the radical Republicans want to do exactly that. I mean, what kind of a history do we have with the federal government stepping into the states and telling the states what to do? We have a very messy, violent, conflicted history with that idea, because what's always been at stake, man, you can't stress this enough.
Here, use these.
Oh, you got that?
They were in my bag.
You're testing them for me. Right. I love them. The man from the Social Studies Council comes prepared. I love it. God, I don't even own one of these. Oh, right. Oh, man.
I brought black too. So.
Oh, no, I love green, man. I was in Michigan State. I can't help it. Anyway, okay. It's not the sexiest subject in American history. And you can get some glazed eyes with your kid. Federalism. Whichism? Think about that for a moment. This is so much at stake in almost everything we're going to talk about. Even the rights of the freedmen on the ground, even the economic rearrangements and changes and revolutions on the ground, from slave labor to tenant farming to sharecropping and so on, is still affected by the system that is inherent, is part of the lifeblood of our Constitution, whether we like it or not. It's the relationship of the federal government to states. Now, what does that damn 10th Amendment say?
The Constitution doesn't say anything. States are top dog.
States are top dog. That's what it says. That's exact language. States are top dog. I like that. Yeah, well, it says all powers not designated to the federal government are reserved to the states, the so-called reserve clause. Now, that sounds relatively benign when you read it, but oh my God, think of the history that's lined up behind that. Oh, Lord. We can call it states' rights if you want. States' rights has huge double meanings to people depending on where you sit, what tradition you represent, which end of the stick you're on. States' rights is used. But Reconstruction is in every way a fight over how federalism will be redefined or not. And you'll see this with the great Supreme Court decisions of Reconstruction, from the Slaughterhouse case in 73 to the Cruikshank case in 76, and especially the U.S. v. Stanley civil rights cases of 1883, which all but wiped out the essential meaning of the 14th Amendment, at least for the 19th century. Didn't wipe it out forever. Thank God. And you actually still live in the land of the 14th Amendment, we hope. And how about that Section 3 of the 14th, which is getting all this attention? Who ever knew we would see people debating Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? I've been out giving some talks recently and people start nodding like, oh, they even know what it is. How did that? Thank you, Donald Trump. I mean, I've said this 1,000 times now. The only good thing Trump has given us is an incredible constitutional education. He doesn't understand it. He doesn't even know he's doing it. Well, I don't know what he knows, but we're having one hell of a constitutional education. Section 3 says you can't hold congressional office or any other office in the federal government if you participated in or aided and abetted an insurrection against the government. But now, the few states that have now begun to try to talk about using this to keep Trump off the ballot, when they go to court, judges are not too keen to use this, are they? If you're following this, that section 3 of the 14th has been used before. It was written because of the war. It was written because of ex-Confederates who are going to get pardoned, almost entirely, and many of them will serve back. In fact, hell, you couldn't get elected a governor of a southern state for 40 years after the Civil War if you hadn't been a Confederate. I mean, they all were, even down to the 19 teens. You weren't a former Confederate. Don't run for governor in Georgia or anywhere else. Anyway, okay, federalism. It's a huge history. Whole careers are made in law schools trying to continually study this and explain this to the rest of us. Second great challenge. Who will rule in Washington, D.C. now that this war is over? Which part of the Constitution, which article of the Constitution will be in control? Is it the presidency or Congress? And the Supreme Court at this point has really been weakened, as I'm sure you know, but partly because of the Dred Scott case, partly because of Justice Taney's fights with Lincoln over habeas corpus. During the Supreme Court's reputation by 1865 is like, not only a tertiary branch, but a really weak one that had helped cause this whole bloody mess. So Supreme Court's going to try to revive its power in Reconstruction, but only slowly and tenuously and with great difficulty. But Reconstruction is, among other things, a great fight over who will control this, presidential power or congressional power. Who controls the readmission or admission under the Constitution? It's very clear. Who controls the admission of new states? It's Congress. All those Western territories that were made into states, they were admitted to the Union by Congress. That's clear under the Constitution. Hence, Sumner, Thaddeus Stevens, and so on. The radicals said, they're not states anymore. We have control. Yeah. Lincoln wanted presidential control because he wants it quicker. He wants it more stable, he thought. Of course, he's not around to see what happens. But this is one of the reasons Andrew Johnson will be impeached. This is a titanic struggle between who's going to control Reconstruction policy. And he wasn't, well, they took 3 tries to 4, really, to do it. But the reason the Republicans went after Andrew Johnson, apart from the fact that they hated him, is because he was standing in the way. He was obstructing everything they were trying to do with Reconstruction. And finally, they at least got too late. They got up the courage to do what impeachment actually is, which is a political act. It's not a legal act, it's a political act. And even then, they couldn't quite pull it off. They had to invent some law that he could break. The 10-Year Office Act, which was pretty unconstitutional. They had to have a little law for him to break so they could feel better about it. You know the history of impeachment now. Well, the last 2 we had, shit, they had narrow and broad view on Trump. He broke some law and he committed political crimes like the so-called negotiations with Ukraine. Anyway, okay, but who's going to rule in Washington? Is a huge part of this story. Third, what are the dimensions of Black freedom? The war liberates from slavery. In historical time, overnight, 4 million people. Who are they? What are they under law? What rights will they have? Will they be protected in their rights? Do they get the right to vote? And they did. First in the 14th, then in the, well, first in the 14th Amendment, then in the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, then again in the 15th Amendment in 69, ratified by 70. This is the only free enslaved population in modern history that was, and you know this, was given the right to vote almost overnight. Political liberty followed liberation almost overnight. Now, that's a messy, complicated story, as we all know, and it's going to cause enormous violence as a counter-revolution from the South. But it's one of the reasons the Republican regimes were put in place at all. And it's certainly one of the reasons Ulysses Grant was elected president in 1868. For the Black male vote in the southern states. Make no mistake. But who are the free people? What are they? Are they wards somehow? You know, all these questions have to have answers. Are they wards somehow of the federal government? Because it's the federal government who liberated them. The states didn't. And this is a whole new big thing for Americans. Look what that federal government had done in this war, because it was an all-out war. What did that Republican regime under Lincoln end up finally doing? Did they set out on day one to do all of these things? Not really. But man, did that war make them do it. Think of the legislation of the Lincoln administration, which only lasts till April 65. They passed the Homestead Act. It's amazing. They've been talking about Homestead Act for 20 years before they finally passed it, which is to make land in the West, you know, divide it up, you improve it, you get it free. That's another thing Americans thought, ooh, free land? Oh my God. What happens to individualism there? Well, the individual goes out and works it. Okay. What else did they do? Transcontinental Railroad? Oh my God. Federal subsidies, federal money. One of the most corrupt things the federal government has ever done, and lined the pockets of, you know, all kinds of bankers and investors and corrupt construction companies like Crédit Mobilier. But it was done by the federal government. Build these, and these were moon landings, man. You know, a transcontinental railroad, and maybe a second one, all the way to the Pacific. Wow. It was like the economic future, but it was the national government doing it. What else? Sorry? The Morrill Act. Locke Morrill from Maine gets his name on this thing. They've been talking about this for a while too. These Republicans, and this is a point at which, you know, let's get to the fourth one here in a moment, but these Republicans are worth stopping on, folks. This original Republican Party. They're a mixture of strange bedfellows from the beginning. They're a classic coalition, born in 1854 around the Kansas-Nebraska Act and, you know, the resistance to the expansion of slavery. They draw in some old Democrats. They draw in radical abolitionists. They draw in moderate anti-slavery people. They draw in some old Whigs that don't have a party anymore, need a home. And they even draw in the nativists, which were a powerful party in the early 1850s, the Know Nothing Party, which elects, hey man, the Know Nothings ruled Massachusetts. Who's from Massachusetts? Yeah, you were a Know Nothing state in the early 1850s. I mean, I don't, if you say that to the people, Massachusetts had good education. There's nothing to do with it. Know Nothings were the nativists, anti-Catholic, lots of things. But the slavery question, this is one of the great lessons of the 1850s, and it flows right into Reconstruction. What's, you know, if you ask, if your students can walk out of your class knowing nothing else, well, you want to know a few other things. But find an issue in American history that tore apart the political party system, forged a new political party, a new whole political force, caused a true realignment, elected the president 6 years into its existence, and oh, by the way, helped cause a civil war. There's no other example. I always tell my students, you want a real political realignment in America? A lot of us generations have been waiting for that in some way or another. I, for one, don't want one. I can come back to that. But if you want a real political realignment, history tells us you get one out of a civil war and a Great Depression. Which would you choose? Would you go Depression or would you go Civil War? Because those are the two great realignments we've had. When did the Democratic Party become the American Liberal Party? It was the New Deal. When did blacks start voting for Democrats? 1936. I mean, they slowly beginning to. The Chicago, one of my favorite newspaper headlines ever. 1936, Chicago Defender, the great black newspaper. It runs a headline that says, Abraham Lincoln is not running in this election. Which is their way of saying party of Lincoln, party of Lincoln. Enough already with the party of Lincoln. He ain't running, folks. And his party in 1936 was all but gone. And still you got Republicans today who have to walk around moaning constantly about how they're the party of Lincoln. So, oh God. Kevin McCarthy was so fond of. Kevin McCarthy has a giant portrait of Frederick Douglass in his office. As does Clarence Thomas. These guys love to love Douglass and Lincoln. They don't have any idea of the history they're abusing. They just keep doing it. Anyway, okay. Fourth big challenge, and it kind of encompasses all the rest. Is Reconstruction going to be? And this is what they were so viscerally debating. Is Reconstruction going to be a restoration of the old or a reinvention of a new country? They're going to make a new constitution, make a new country rooted in emancipation and therefore the stirrings, at least, of racial democracy in law. Or is this going to be, as Andrew Johnson wished, really just a restoration of the old Union? Andrew Johnson's slogan, don't forget, sometimes slogans are very useful because, you can kind of remember them. And your students would remember this one. Johnson and his ilk said, the Union as it was, the Constitution as it is. All right, restore the Union. You got to put the states back together, but don't touch the Constitution. No racial equality, no civil rights, no political rights. Don't alter the Constitution. This was a deep set of beliefs, not just in the white South, but in the Northern Democratic Party as well. And it not only died hard, it's going to revive as Reconstruction goes on. And the country has other imperatives, not least of which was that terrible economic depression that hit the country in 1870. Not like an economic depression to sort of alter your point of view. We lived through one in 2008. And suddenly, that's all anyone could think about. Did I lose my pension? What about my mortgage? Can I ever afford college for my kid? Suddenly, nothing else seems to matter. Anyway, who's going to rule in the South? Who's going to rule in the federal government or Washington? What are the dimensions of Black freedom? Which is, if anything, the biggest challenge of all. And is it a recreation of the old or transformation to the new? All right, emancipation. And I'll stop a moment here with me on, I can get through part of this before we do a coffee break at 10:45. The word revolutions. I don't know, it can mean everything and nothing. But almost everybody who writes about Reconstruction, and not without good reason, talks about it as, in effect, the Second American Revolution. Now, it's not a revolution against the British Empire, it's not a revolution against foreign something or other. But look, emancipation was a revolution. It was a social revolution on the ground. It was a political revolution. It was a constitutional revolution. Think from, I mean, you know, a lot of people have to, you know, scoff a bit at the Emancipation Proclamation. You know, it's an amazing document, it's an interesting document. But it didn't free everybody, you know, the whole routine about that. But wait a minute. It's the largest confiscation of property in American history. There's never been anything else like it. It'd be like liquidating the tech companies. Slaves are the largest asset in the entire American economy on the eve of the Civil War, worth about $3.5 billion in 19th century money. Huge sums of money. That Emancipation Proclamation is an executive order ordering the military to do this. Yes, it didn't free slaves initially in the states, not in rebellion, which meant Kentucky, Missouri, and so on, for them. But before long, it's a liberating text and a liberating measure everywhere the Union forces went. Make no mistake. Now, it's causing, beyond what its own author might have actually imagined, and his people, and some in his cabinet thought he was going too far. It's a revolution beyond what they could even imagine, because it has responsibilities now. And here's a key point. I could choose 2 or 3 of these radical Republicans to focus on, and maybe we will before noon. Like a John Bingham of Ohio, who wrote Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. He's an amazing guy. He's this very 19th century combination of an evangelical Christian. Today he'd be on the far right, I suppose, of the Republican Party. I don't know. But in those years, an evangelical Christian from Ohio who grows up with the crisis over fugitive slaves and you know what we call Underground Railroad activity and anti-slavery, gets in Congress. And he's an early Republican. He cuts his teeth politically. This is one example of many. He cuts his teeth politically as an old Whig who becomes a Republican. He becomes a Republican in 1854, 55, 56, because he's opposed to the expansion of slavery. He's kind of a moderate at first, but like many of them, he radicalizes with time. He hated the Fugitive Slave Act. He found that to be such an egregious abuse of power and of people. And then comes, you know, Bleeding Kansas, the Civil War in Kansas, and you know, he understood that. He's from a Western state, Ohio. And then comes the Dred Scott decision, which frankly radicalized a lot of Republicans. Because what did that decision really say? It said, you may care about the future of slavery, but it doesn't make any difference because Black people will never be citizens of the United States. They have no rights. Bingham couldn't abide that. And then you get, you know, John Brown's raid, you get on and on and on. These people grew up with the slavery crisis. You think about your own political lives, whatever level you've ever been involved in politics. What shaped you? What issues? What events? What shocks? Whatever age you are. I can name some of them for me. It goes back to civil rights and the Vietnam War. And then Watergate. God, you know, in the summer of 1973, oh God, am I forgetting which year? That's terrible. I was preparing to teach about impeachment. Oh man, I was reading everything there was about impeachment. you know, and the son of a bitch resigned. And it just blew I was gonna do like, you know, a month and a half, I was gonna do mock trials, man, I was ready. Nixon got on the helicopter and said, bye. And that word pardon, which was an abuse of the pardon power. I did teach about that. Anyway, so we know that events shape us. Think about being a sort of moderate anti-slavery Republican through the course of the 1850s and the way events are going to shape you. You have to respond now. Kansas, Nebraska, Bleeding Kansas, the Dred Scott case, John Brown's raid, and on. That's only a short list. Then comes the war. On all the theories of short war are pretty well gone by 1862. And what are these Republicans doing while they have a majority in both houses? They're starting to pass these confiscation acts, which give power to the armies to free slaves when they come into their lines. The second confiscation act, the spring 1862, went a little further than the Emancipation Proclamation would later. And then, you know, and they're prodding Lincoln. John Bingham is one of those guys now who finds himself called a radical Republican. Finally, he said, all right, fine. And he's prodding Lincoln along with some other folks, A. Stevens and many others. Act against slavery, sir. It's the only way you're going to win this war. Our obligation now is not only to put the Union back together, but to win the war. And the way you win the war is to destroy the South social labor system. Yes, you do it out of necessity. And Lincoln used the word in the proclamation, military necessity. Haven't we loved to hate that phrase? And he didn't mean to do it. It's just military necessity. You know what we've learned? There's a great book on this by Lou Mazer. It's called Lincoln and the 100 Days. Yeah. It's the 100 days between the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation and the final Emancipation Proclamation. And Lou went into diaries and soldiers' letters and local newspapers. And he found that thousands of people, not just Lincoln, are using the term military necessity. They're demanding the Lincoln administration announce emancipation because it's a military necessity to win this war. Now, where is that just what? Some kind of necessity? And when is it a moral position? How do you see that line? When does the idea of military necessity as a means of winning the war fall over into, well, now we have a moral obligation to do it? That's a John Bingham. And Bingham goes on, and I hate to keep doing it. I mean, some of us have thought that John Bingham deserves a stamp, and I don't know, whatever else we can get for the poor guy. Because at the end of the war, he becomes the chairman of that tribunal, or that committee that had to adjudicate the Lincoln assassination. He was the chair of that group that prosecuted Booth's conspirator. Now, Booth was already dead, but Booth's conspirators, and sentenced them to be hanged. Then he's a committee chairman as they started debating not only who's going to rule in Washington, but who are the freedmen. And Bingham writes Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. The most, I would argue, most important clause in the Constitution. All people born here, it's got 3 great principles in it: birthright citizenship, privileges and immunities clause, all those before law. In fact, I tend to carry it around. Here it is. Do you carry a pocket constitution? You should. Everywhere I go now, they give me one, so I have all kinds of these. But several years ago, I wrote a piece in the Atlantic. What do you call it? I think the piece called it "The Civil War is Not Over." I think that's what it was. It was in 2015. And I was already arguing that, you know, the Section 1 of the 14th Amendment should be carried in everybody's pocket and blah, 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 you know. Well, pretty soon I would show up at places and I'd be given a talk and they would produce on a laminated card. This one's from Sewanee University in Tennessee. They would produce on a laminated card, section 1 of the 14th Amendment. I got them from, I don't know, the Maine Humanities Council, the Vermont Humanities Council, you know. And so I made this point in that piece in the Atlantic. So the photo they had was somebody holding one of these. There it is. There, no, holding the Constitution.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah. All right. Hey, what the hell? But Bingham, what is Bingham doing here? And then I'll drop Bingham. Because he's just like a prototype. But Bingham, in the debates of 1866, those ferocious debates in Congress of 1866, where they're debating. All right, if we're going to have a we got the 13th Amendment. That had to have, you know, ending slavery. It's a very simple clause, and I know that allows incarceration and so on, although frankly, Americans have historically been sloppy, in my humble view, in how they've used and interpreted the 13th Amendment. This idea that the 13th Amendment is somehow responsible for modern incarceration problems, just my humble personal opinion, is nonsense. What's responsible for modern incarceration are the drug laws. And that 13th Amendment couldn't, when they wrote the 13th Amendment, they couldn't have a clue that America would end up with this gigantic drug problem in the mid to late 20th century and pass all these idiotic laws sending people to prison for 20 years for smoking marijuana. You know, that's what filled the prisons, not that clause in the 13th Amendment, despite Ava DuVernay's film. The second half of which I thought was brilliant, because it deals with the modern urban crisis. I thought the second half of that film was brilliant. First half, I don't know. Anyway, Bingham goes before Congress, debate after debate, speech after speech. I read all of those debates. Goes on for 3 months. Talk about democracy. Messy, but amazing democracy. These guys are debating. Can we do this? Bingham said, you have to do this because what we're really doing is federalizing the Bill of Rights. We're saying to the country now, because of this war and emancipation and all that it brings, that Bill of Rights, those 10 amendments, or at least 8 of them, they are going to be responsibility of the federal government now, not just the states. He is walking right into the morass of federalism and he's saying, folks, we won the war. Federal government won the war. The Union Army, the Navy won the war. The rights of the free people must be federal rights. Now, in the long run, at least in the 19th century, he's going to lose that fight. He's going to lose that debate. And even the Supreme Court's going to make sure he loses it. But think of the implications of that. If that could have, you know, we're always talking about ifs, right? In history, they're kind of fun. What if, what if, what if? You play that with students sometimes. What if this happens and instead of that, it goes here and then there and then there? It's kind of fun. It's one of a nice parlor game or classroom game. What if there had been the will to truly federalize the Bill of Rights with bayonets, because it's what it would have taken. But it's not because they didn't try. Just read that section 1 of the 14th. I'll read it out loud. All persons born or naturalized in the, and by the way, they debated this language over and over and over. This is the one they agreed upon. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States, birthright citizenship, and of the state wherein they reside. They threw that in because the only definitions of citizenship in American history have been state citizenship. You'd be a citizen of Virginia, but not of the nation. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. Now, privileges and immunities will have many definitions, but there it is. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Now, general language, an incredibly powerful, the equal protection clause. My lawyer friends tell me that about somewhere around 2/3 of all litigation in American courtrooms are 14th Amendment litigation based on equality before the law. I mean, that's what's going on in our courts. And of course, it gets twisted in all sorts of directions and ways. Even when the Supreme Court put George W. Bush in the presidency, rather than following who actually won in Florida, they did it based on the equal protection of Florida. Sorry?
We can't treat some ballots differently. Why am I giving this ballot extra scrutiny?
Yeah, I know. I know. Okay, yes, ma'am.
So, I want to go back to one of your points with, federalism. The inception of the country with the Constitution, the creation of the Constitution.
Right.
So the fallout clause then would be your states' rights, right?
That's part of what federalism means.
Right.
States have
So,
lots of rights.
Right, that's how they're always able to in place policies
Mhm.
under that
Mhm.
in their rights. And then through the 3/5 compromise, in
Mhm.
order to even establish the Constitution,
Right.
you have people of color who are never seen as true citizens,
Right.
arguably because of now you want to include them in a number, right, for
Mhm. Yeah, South would have preferred 100%.
for representation, and now taxation.
Right.
Right, and so then that also turns to leaning toward federal, but all policies that are established under the Constitution leave that clause
Mhm.
where you can still debatably argue a person's citizenship, right, constantly based on the state. Because if you look at the
Okay.
Native Americans at this point that are,
Counted.
they're in no man's land because
Right.
they're on the
Right.
reservation, so.
Well, there are no reservations in the early
Well,
republic.
they're gonna,
Much later.
yeah, but
Okay,
they're going
okay.
to exclude them for citizenship, and then now
Mhm.
the issue versus property and citizenship and having the right to vote.
Mhm.
So the whole idea of the 14th Amendment is still, in my opinion, based on the law, still a clause
Yeah.
there where you can constantly keep
Yeah.
changing based on policy
Yeah.
people's rights to citizenship to this country, or just in
Right.
general, and you can always throw it back to the state. So I was living in the South during the pandemic, and South Carolina was like, we're not wearing no stinking masks, we're
No.
not doing anything that you want.
Masks are an invasion of your liberty.
Exactly, so it always can go back to the state where they still
Mhm.
continually have the
Mhm.
issue. So when you talk about the idea of Reconstruction,
Yeah.
even though the federal government, I guess I'm trying to make the point that there was just always a compromise put in place or a Band-Aid put in place
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
they can always lean out the issue of
Yeah.
people of color,
Uh-huh.
where they're going to be kind of a pawn through the whole system
Okay.
in policies.
Mhm. Fair enough, but this was not a Band-Aid when it was passed. With complete respect, I know, I understand your point, I know where you're going with it. Because the Constitution is, as we were saying, this has many interpretations. What's equality before law mean? Eventually, before the end of the 19th century, it's being used to support the equality of corporations,
Right.
not individuals,
Right.
black or white.
They were in black ones, but.
It's about enforcement.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay, so there you go, that's,
It's about putting police power.
When are you-
Right.
When are you willing to send the 101st Airborne Division down to a school to make sure it's integrated?
you know.
And the civil rights movement, and
Yeah.
take Eisenhower, 57, Little Rock, and then after. Eisenhower was a states' rightist. And everybody loves Eisenhower, and that's fine. I mean, God. I mean, some Eisenhower's back in the Republican Party.
Think it would be.
They'd be kicked out.
Well, he wouldn't have a party, but Eisenhower hated the idea of moving federal troops into the South, but he had to. He had no choice. At that point, he had no choice. He hated doing it. Even Kennedy hated doing it. Because of our history with the use of federal troops and power against states. States have enormous, just look around, look what we're living through now. Look, I mean, states have enormous authority over, well, everything from voting rights to education, especially voting rights. In the 65 civil rights, voting rights bill, it was Bingham on steroids. They said section 5 of the 65, is it section 5? I think it is. This 65 Voting Rights Act named those states with the worst histories of violation of the right to vote, just egregious histories, horrible histories. And it wasn't just the ex-Confederate states, there were others. And it said, no change in any voting law shall ever happen without being cleared by the Civil Rights Division of the Federal Justice Department. That's what this was supposed to mean. Until John Roberts decided racism was essentially gone. In Shelby v. Holder in 2014. And after numerous renewals of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, he said, you know, we don't need that anymore. And what happened? Within 48 hours, about 3 states passed voter ID laws and voter restriction laws because they have the state power to do that. And they're still doing it every day of our lives. This is a dynamic, I don't know why I keep holding this. It's a dynamic struggle between federal power and state power. And who's got the political clout to make it? Well, what did Republicans do in the last 25 years? They started taking over state legislatures.
Yes.
And they were really good at it.
Yes.
And they're still good at it. And started gerrymandering. Look, I know both parties have done gerrymandering over the years. But gerrymandering belongs to the right now. And boy, are they good at it. 56.8% of everyone who voted for a US senator in 2020 voted for a Democrat. 43.4% voted for a Republican for a US Senate. What's the Senate? 50-50. Part of that is because every state's got 2 of them. Part of that is because the Senate from the founders is a highly undemocratic institution. It just is, folks. Why does Wyoming have the same representation as New York, California, Texas, and Florida? Because, well, they only had 13 of them when they wrote the damn Constitution, and some of them were small. Fine, okay. It seemed sort of benign then, but that was a slavery compromise too.
Yeah.
No question about that. I think there's a risk, is all I'm saying, at simply concluding that this Constitution, which we fought over forever, revised, amended 26 times? 27. Thank you. And it's so damn hard to do. And they've always come in clusters, haven't they? 13, 14, 15. And then you got 16, 17, 18, 19 in the early 20th century. And then we had some sort of necessity. We had that VP problem there with Nixon and, Jesus, how do we get a VP now? Well, I need a constitutional amendment because, presidents resign. That wasn't supposed to happen. They didn't plan for that. And sure didn't plan for a Trump who just commits crime after crime after crime and then may get reelected. Ooh, James Madison is just vomiting in man, did we blow it. But sir,
I'm just refresh my memory, clarification, readmission to the Union
mhm,
of the previously Confederate states.
right,
You had to agree to which amendments?
Okay.
Was it the 13th, the 14th, or I'm just trying to.
great,
you're
because
talking
we
about
didn't
this is
stop
important.
on that. I'm rushing through a lot here, assuming you all know everything. When Republicans gain full control of Reconstruction, which they do in 66, 67, they blunt Andrew Johnson's efforts to, elect majorities for what he was really a Democrat, an old Democrat. He wasn't, and that's another story how he got on Lincoln's ticket in 1864. Which Lincoln is never held responsible for, by the way. You know that? And the one thing Lincoln gave us of all.
He makes it politically viable to assassinate the president.
Well, okay, that's, all right. Okay. But once Republicans gained control of Reconstruction, they not only passed the 14th Amendment, which doesn't get ratified for another year, but they passed 4 Reconstruction Acts in 67. The first Reconstruction Act, the big one, and the following 3 were all sort of enforcement measures for the first. The first Reconstruction Act passed in the winter of 1867 over Andrew Johnson's veto. Andrew Johnson will veto everything the Republican Congress will do. Andrew Johnson issued more vetoes in 2 years than all previous American presidents had ever. The Constitution wasn't working so well. Have you noticed here? It's not supposed to operate by veto and override a veto. I mean, it happens, but it's not the best way for it to function. He vetoed everything they did. They overrode it because they had 2/3 majority of both houses. That first Reconstruction Act set up in the South 5 military districts. A commanding general, a military leader in charge of each of the 5. You know, there was Virginia, North Carolina, there were South Carolina, Georgia. I mean, 5 districts of the old the 11 Confederate states were divided into 5 districts, commanded by a general. Elections for new state constitutions in those states to be controlled by the occupation army. For a short time, there was an occupation. Actually, the occupation sort of lasted longer than we sometimes have imagined. This is what's always referred to as the failure of Reconstruction, when the occupation ended and the troops were fully pulled out. It's nonsense that the troops were finally pulled out in 1877. The troops have been pulled out long before that. But anyway, so federal government oversees the elections for delegates to new state constitutional writing conventions. And it has a clause, this is crucial. It's the first Reconstruction Act that floats the right to vote. The 14th Amendment had sort of, but the first Reconstruction Act of the winter of 67 said all new states must allow all free Black males to vote. Yes, male. And the word male will get into the Constitution in the 14th and 15th, or in the 15th Amendment, the right to vote.
Okay, so
Now,
this is coming when you got the new constitutions and the Black males are gonna first vote
in 67,
67
and they will vote.
throughout the South.
Yes,
Okay.
and they really vote in 1868. But here's the thing, to your question, what does it take to get back in the Union? They had to ratify first of all, they have to write a new state constitution, which allows Black suffrage and approves the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which was a limited civil rights act, but the first of its kind in American history, that actually enumerated 5 different rights. They were mostly rights to contract, rights to property, and rights to go to court. First time the American Congress had ever passed a civil rights act, and that's what they call it. It's the Civil Rights Act. They'll pass another one in 1875. Anyway, you got to write a new constitution that allows Black suffrage that ratifies the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and you will be readmitted to the Union under a regime that says ex-Confederates are not allowed seats in the Congress. They have to take a loyalty oath, the so-called ironclad oath, which isn't going to last very long. The so-called ironclad, because it wasn't really possible. The ironclad oath that the Republicans were trying to use basically said you had to swear you had never served in the Confederacy or aided and abetted the Confederate war effort. Now, yeah, well, and how do you find a large number of white
How do
Southerners?
you know they're not lying?
Well,
How do you know
mhm.
that?
Well, in some cases you would, because the person had been a colonel in the Confederate Army or held state office in a Confederate state, or you couldn't hide.
Like a low level.
A low-level
soldier.
farmer could get away
Like,
with saying anything he
How
wanted.
can you prove?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons this ironclad oath didn't last very long. And because pardoning them became a political issue that, anyway, so to get back into the Union, form a new state government, you allow black suffrage, you have to ratify the 13th Amendment, you have to accept the 13th Amendment, and the 14th. Now, this is the big rub. The southern states are going to say, nothing violated the mentality of white supremacy quite like the 14th Amendment. I mean, again, just it's equality. Are you kidding? So they say, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll ratify it until we won't. Now, officially, all of the ex-Confederate states are readmitted to the Union by 1870 and 71 by this process. Some a little quicker than others, some take a little longer. Georgia had to be readmitted twice because they were early readmitted and then just blatantly started violating everything about the agreement by sending no less than Alexander H. Stevens, the former vice president of the Confederacy, to Congress. Wait a minute. Oh, no, he can't enter. By the way, he only just got out of prison 3 months before. So those are the essential ingredients of readmission to. It's tough. This is the Republicans, call them radicals, running Reconstruction, saying only when you satisfy these strictures will you come back into the Union. And it will take time. Well, it turns out not that long. It takes 2, 3, 4 years. And in that period, from 67, 66 is early 66, 67, 68, and then 69, 70, 71, the so-called radical regimes or Republican regimes are put in place in all of the ex-Confederate states, which immediately starts causing a counter-revolution. The Klan is born, as some of you know, as early as 1866. It becomes active, really active, and other organizations. By the way, the Klan was only one organization, it had many imitators. It becomes active, really active by 1868, especially in election years, and political violence. I have a whole lecture on this from my course about the uses of violence in Reconstruction. By 68, the Klan is very active, as are many others. There's hundreds and hundreds of political murders, especially around elections, almost entirely of blacks or white Republicans. They went after anybody who was voting Republican. All kinds of economic intimidation. This goes on into 68, 69, 70. Technically, all of the ex-Confederate states are readmitted officially by 70 and 71. But the counter movement against them, the white counter revolution in the South, man, make no mistake, this is the classic American example of counter revolution. It isn't just in the Ku Klux Klan, it's in the Southern Democratic Party. It's a political movement that has a violent wing, they will, and their definition of taking back control is what they call redemption, redeeming their states. A few southern states are redeemed by the Southern Democrats as early as 1872. That is at elections. Meaning they took back control. Virginia was redeemed in 1874. As there were about 6 others. By 1875 and 1876, this shows, this is your rise and fall. We're getting ahead of ourselves. That's fine. This is your rise and fall. And the fall is, if anything, almost as fast as the rise. Because by about 1875, there are 4 states left that have not been taken over by the Southern Democratic Party by various means, violence, intimidation, and ballots. They are at that point Mississippi, South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. Mississippi was overtaken by the Southern Democrats in what was known as the Mississippi Plan, the Mississippi Rifle Plan, as they sometimes called it. It was a violent overthrow of the Reconstruction government in Mississippi, such that by the general election of 1876, so-called disputed election of 76, which we could talk about after our little break, there are only 3 states left under Republican control. There were South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, where you had South Carolina and almost in Louisiana, you had a black majority. And you still have Republican governors barely holding on. But back to your question, to get back into the Union, these former Confederate states had to behave as though they were abiding by the 13th Amendment, the First Civil Rights Act, the 14th Amendment, and the Reconstruction Acts. And almost as soon as they got back into the Union, a vigorous counter movement was already happening to overthrow those regimes.
Because you're talking about the importance of it. And so there was this sort of superficial, okay, well, this is what we need to do to get in, this is what we'll do, and we get in.
Yeah.
At the same time, you're undermining the whole process.
Yeah, I mean, there's several states that make great examples, Georgia in particular. People just lied through their teeth, about taking oaths, passing this and passing that, agreeing in their new state constitution to approval of the 14th Amendment, which they never intended to do. Now, a lot of Republicans in Washington sort of knew that. And they knew they weren't getting, cooperation, but they still believed in enforcement. But they're going to get overtaken. These Republicans don't sustain their control of the US Congress for very long, which is another one of these lessons for the rest of our history, the rest of American history. Right when you think you're winning, when you're winning majority, you got some control, watch out, because the resistance is coming. And in fact, the National Democratic Party took back control of both houses of Congress by 1874. It's one of the most pivotal, it's one of the most complete overturning elections we've ever had. It went from something like a majority of 140 Republicans in Congress to a majority of 60 or 70 Democrats in one election. It was a reaction election. And by the way, virtually everybody in the South who'd been in any way a Confederate of any kind had been pardoned by then. They can all vote now. And do they ever? And a whole lot of black people aren't voting because they might get shot. It's the only time in American history, by the way, we could go deeply into this if you want to. Maybe you do in your courses. It's the only time in American history for a period of, short period of years when overt violence was part of normal politics, electoral politics. Today, if one person was murdered at a voting poll, You know, we'd have CNN drones on top of it, you know, there'd be men on the street interviews, you know, oh, what did you see? One person. There were voting polls where 10, 15, and 20 people were just shot trying to get to the polls. In many of these cases. Part of it is because the South was still quite rural. Anyway, that's a long way of getting at what is a very good question. Go ahead.
No, it's, so what impact then did the Northern Democrats have during the time of the radical actions between that 1867 and
Yeah.
1870?
A slow revival. And this is the era, as you know, I'm sure, of the so-called waving the bloody shirt. What does that mean? What does that mean? When people were accused of waving the bloody shirt, and all sides did it, what did that mean in the 1860s and 1870s? When somebody waved, yeah.
So, well, okay, so, I mean, I get what's going on in Washington.
Uh-huh.
I think, I don't know if you're gonna talk about it later or not, but
Yeah.
I think also you need to talk about Garrison Fraser,
Oh, yeah,
Sherman.
yeah.
Is that later?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna, that's the.
That's down, all right, so I'll leave you alone.
No. Do you know who Garrison Fraser is? Right after a little break, we'll do some Garrison Fraser.
Because I mean, this
In
is.
fact, I've got the whole colloquy.
Well, it's contemporaneous to what you're talking about, so I
Of
think,
course it is, of course it is.
so I'll leave you alone.
There's, no, it's not- you're not leaving me alone. The story on the ground is influencing the story in Washington. The story in Washington is influencing the story on the ground. But your question was,
The Northern Democrats.
yeah, Northern Democrats experience a slow revival. They get hammered in the 1867, 66, 67, and 68 elections. But after that, the Northern Democrats, with different reasons, were believers in white supremacy. And I'm not just saying this to use the phrase, that's what they believed. It was a foundational approach for them. They hated Reconstruction. They believed, oh, it's Northern Democrats who pillory Republicans about the significance of states' rights. They don't want the federal government moving into southern states and doing this and doing that because they don't want to move into Ohio doing this and doing that. It's a powerful, powerful impulse. And again, just like in our own time, voters get fatigued. Voters get tired of certain visceral issues. If you're a voter in Ohio or wherever you are, in the North, in Indiana, Ohio, Massachusetts, Connecticut. Okay, maybe you even, hey, Sebastian, maybe you even voted for Lincoln twice. And when you vote for Grant, of course you vote for Grant, 68, he's a war hero. But man, by the 1870s, you're tired. You're tired of the slavery question. You're tired of racial issues. You're tired of all this racial equality. You don't quite believe in it anyway, but it's kind of a necessity. So you're tired of all this, and you're susceptible now to the appeals from other political persuasions. And then, very important, folks, this is why history is always this messy, complicated mixture of 5 forces at once. An economic depression hits in 1873 that is big time.
That was gonna be my other question.
Huge. I mean, the so-called panic of 1873 lasted the rest of the decade. Terrible unemployment hits the northern cities. I mean, shit, 40% unemployment in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, etc. by 1874. Railroads, some railroads ceased to exist and shut down. Actually, they were overbuilding them for a while. And so people are worried about many other things. And that retreat from Reconstruction is partly a retreat born of this economic fear, terrible fear. And boy, could the Democrats appeal to that. Who do you blame? Who's in power? The Republicans. And by the way, the Grant administration had one corruption scandal after another, which didn't help. All right. I think it's coffee break time. Let me leave you here. Yes, I've been stressing constitutional change, and not without reason. But let's pick up here and here and look at what's going on the ground. What are people doing? What is this transition in the South? The vast majority, 90% plus, of African Americans liberated in this war from slavery stayed in the South. Some begin to move towards cities. There's a small but significant urban migration going on, which is going to pick up even more, a lot more by the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. And then it becomes even a northern migration. There's very little in the way of northern migration of Black folks in the wake of the Civil War. A whole lot of white Northerners feared that, but it didn't really happen. They're staying in the South. And many of them are staying on the same property and the same land. In fact, the vast majority are. I mean, where are they going to go? And I'll leave you with this. What's going to begin to take hold, it's a classic sort of economic transformation that has many bad implications. Slavery's gone. It's legally gone. But white planters who have survived now and are landowners want one thing more than anything else. They want to keep their labor. They're desperate to keep Black folk on the land. What are Black folk desperate for? Their own land, their own some degree of autonomy. They want to get their women out of the field. They want to own a piece of land, a piece of property. They think, hopefully, ownership. They want some independence. In this world of the demands, is a classic kind of economic historical problem. In this world of the demand of the planter class, and by the way, cotton is going to revive. Cotton really revived, and it took 20 years. The former slaves, the freed people, want a little bit of autonomy, want a little bit of control. They need some cash. And by the way, it's a totally cash poor society. There's no money. You can't go to a bank and just give me a loan. There's no such thing. There's no credit. There's no cash. It's a destroyed civilization trying to remake itself. So what comes out of that? A kind of a deal. And it's a devil's deal. It's called sharecropping. It begins with tenant farming. It begins with sort of working on parts. Part of my crop for you, part of my crop goes to the granary, and I get some cash then to buy goods. But pretty soon it becomes working on halves, half of my crop to the planter. Oh, and by the way, Black folk no longer were, and on many, at least the big plantation, say in the Mississippi Valley or in southern Georgia, Alabama, in the old Cotton Belt, and we have all kinds of maps of this. I have one with me. People would no longer want to live in the slave quarters, the old quarters. Hell no. They wanted to build new cabins, and they did, out across the plantation, next to their little 30 acres or 20 acres. And that was their own land. They used to have a little garden, now they have their own land. But the problem is sharecropping is a dead end. They don't know it yet. By 1868, that's how fast. By 1868, the tenant farming sharecropping system already takes hold because it has to. You want to get a crop? It takes hold. By the 1870s, certainly by the 1880s, when you go through Reconstruction, eventually about 80% of the freed people freed in the war. And now you got a second generation coming up. By the way, the Black population, all those old crazy racist theories, the Black population is going to die out. They're not capable of living as free people. They'll be disoriented in freedom and on and on and on and on and on. Black population more than doubles. There are 9 million Black people by 1890. But 80% of them are living in one form or another of sharecropping, which is a debt system. You take your crop, owner gets usually half. You take the other half to the furnishing merchant or the granary, which is the same thing, and they pay you maybe enough to buy more seed, to buy more tools, to get a mule, maybe, but you're in debt, and you're in debt forever. But it must be understood, and the best scholarship on this has shown this over and over and over. It evolves as a compromise. Because both sides want something new that doesn't, well, to Black folk, it's something new that doesn't feel like slavery. It gives them some element of autonomy. And it's so easy for us to sit here in now the 21st century and say, well, why didn't they just leave?
Where was it gonna go?
Yeah, where are they gonna go? The North doesn't want them, not yet. Well, come World War I, oh, yeah. Increase industrialization in northern cities, yeah, come on. Come up here, we got jobs. But it becomes a Faustian bargain between the needs of both sides. And hence, this, and you can still see, of course, in parts of the South, the remnants of sharecropper cabins and so on and so on. All over the South, people are always going to these plantations. Oh, do you have slave cabins? Do you have slave quarters? Well, I don't know if those are slave quarters, but those were sharecroppers' quarters. Is that good enough? And then they preserve those. And people think they're seeing slave cabins, or I don't know. I don't know what that appeal is, but it's a thing. And Dacia's put some amazing things up on the wall here. Maybe you want to tell us about it, and then we'll go get some coffee.
Yeah, so we have, we're gonna start, I really love that we're ending there. I'm kind of focusing a lot
Outsiders coming in.
And now you've got all these, I guess, expatriates or whatever, Americans who live in Ghana nowadays. A growing community of people.
I don't want any parts of that. I mean, constant running water. I mean, it was awesome. We went for 8 weeks.
That's what I did find about
Easily
waiving
found
the
partial
budget.
Just a quick thank you, and obviously you'll kind of continue on throughout this activity a bit as well, but just thank you to Dr. Blight, just to kind of sit down and really think about all the different ways in which Reconstruction is important. I really love kind of that just first start of just thinking about Reconstruction as a defeat. Because there's an activeness to that as opposed to something that just kind of like collapsed. But I also appreciate just the kind of emphasis, and that's really what we're going to focus on for the rest of the day, is just thinking about African Americans in the midst of this. Something that we're going to talk about later is looking at how different states across the country have taught Reconstruction, what the framing of it is. And I'll just kind of do a quick spoiler alert. One of the big things that the Zen Project was able to see is that oftentimes Black people are treated as objects. And the Republicans and the Democrats are treated as subjects. And so what we want to do really quickly before we head to lunch, because lunch is here, I'm just letting y'all know, it's gonna be good. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, gonna be a good time. But I want us to kind of think about what were the ways in which these people practiced freedom, right? And practice is to me, is such an important word. I've taught Reconstruction several times. I've taught it on Saturdays to students in Waterbury, and they always kind of find that interesting, right? That freedom is a practice, something that you showcase, something that you perform to an extent. And so how did African Americans practice freedom during Reconstruction, even in the attempts to destroy that? How did this practice redefine the social, political, cultural landscape of the United States? And then more importantly, how is this activism still found today? I'm really excited to focus this afternoon on the third Reconstruction, the second Reconstruction. But it's gonna be a little bit of a silent activity. So each of you have some Post-it notes on your desk or your little tape on your table. Sorry, throwback. You got some Post-it notes on your table, and we have all of these wonderful just examples of just tangible ways in which African Americans, their experiences during this time. And what I want you to do is just take a pen, walk around, and just respond. Just respond. Have any questions? I'm gonna give you about 20 minutes to do so. You can do it with other people, but eventually when we come back, I want us to hopefully be able to report back out, how did they do this? So which image is sticking out to you? So I'm gonna give you 20 minutes to do that. And again, you can do that in partners, individually, whatever works for you.